Thank you, David, and thank you to the Cultural Alliance for this opportunity to give you some background into the Connecticut Main Street Center. I'd like to thank all of the artists in the room. Who is actually an artist, visual, performing? I try to be an amateur photographer. I really do enjoy that. The reason I want to thank you is because you bring joy, you bring insight, and you bring beauty into your communities and to the state of Connecticut as a whole. And it's critically important for the health of our communities that you do the work that you do, that there's organizations such as the Cultural Alliance to give you the support, to band together, to collaborate with one another. Having the joint marketing is absolutely crucial. You know, in a lot of the communities I've dealt with across the state of Connecticut, you know, they have a lot of cultural assets. They might have theaters, they may have farmers markets, they have performing community performing arts groups, but they don't work together. They're kind of isolated, they market on their own, and they won't attract the number of visitors to their locations without that collaboration. So I applaud the Alliance for doing that. Also, this tool of the Space Finder is wonderful, new opportunity, and I hope that spreads throughout the state of Connecticut so that when folks are looking for a unique space such as this one, to have their program in, that they would be able to do that. It's been several years since I've been here at the Stepping Stones Museum. I've a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, but we certainly enjoyed coming down to the museum many years ago. So the Connecticut Main Street Center, as David mentioned, is a statewide nonprofit organization. It was actually formed in the by CL&P, now Eversource. They spun us off as a nonprofit in 1999. That time, we've been providing services throughout the state of Connecticut. Our network currently of municipalities is over 75 communities that work with us on a regular basis, representing 1.9 million people in the state of Connecticut. We are looking to expand that network to more and more communities. Since I started 5 months ago, I've hit approximately 50 different communities. I will recommend that some of the people in the room are linked in with me and on Twitter. I don't exactly remember what my Twitter tag is, but take a look. As I'm traveling around the state and I see something unique, something that's going to rise to the level of what other communities would want to see, some best practices both in economic development and community development. And a lot of folks those are really both economic and community development, they're really tied together. You can't do one without the other. Some folks talk about it as being asset-based economic and community development. So what is it that's already in your communities that you can seize upon, that you can package together to help attract businesses and visitors to your community? So some of the things that Connecticut Main Street Center will do is training, have half-day workshops. We have pretty much a monthly webinar series. Our last webinar highlighted the Hartford line with Smart Growth America, the new commuter rail line that's going to go from New Haven to Springfield. We had a national audience of developers who were interested in mixed-use development. Coming webinars are going to be related to the state historic tax credit and that tool that communities can. We give technical assistance. I get phone calls from the Mike Moores and the Mark Barnharts of the world in the Economic Development Office or the Planning Office, a range of issues. We want to do a complete streets project. Where can we find the funding? We'd like to do a facade treatment program. Do you know of other communities that already have a program description and guidelines so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? So there's a number of different items that folks will call us up about. We advocate for our members in all of the downtowns throughout the state, as David mentioned. We teamed in 2015 with the Connecticut Economic Development Association and the Connecticut chapter of the American Planners Association, as well as Yale Law School and Pullman and Comley to create this municipal tax increment financing. That is a workshop in and of itself, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that today, but it is an important new tool for downtowns and communities to utilize. And so utilizing our statewide network, we want to advocate for other items that are important to our communities. For instance, slowing down traffic in your downtowns. You know, there's a designated speed limit, design speed through DOT, but often it's much higher than you really need going through a Main Street area. I'll touch base also a little later on our efforts on the State Historic Tax Credit Program. We also have networking opportunities pretty much quarterly. We partner with the Connecticut Economic Development Association, CEDAS, and APA. We travel around the state. Our next one will be in Wallingford, highlighting their downtown. They have a brand new station on the commuter line, so it's just an opportunity for people to get together, tour the downtown area, learn some best practices. We have an educational component, and then we end up at some local establishment for some refreshments. Our annual awards banquet this year is actually going to be in Danbury in June, so keep an eye out for that. So before launching into placemaking in general, I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about market forces. Okay, so why focus on downtowns? Most communities, they're the government center, the cultural center, and often the business center of the communities. They are economic engines that really need to be seized upon. For many years, they were kind of forgotten in many communities as auto-centric development occurred and the malls were developed. Many of our downtowns were forgotten, but there has been a move back to really focus in on our main streets, and it's really a phenomenal thing that's happening. Last year, we commissioned an economic analysis firm, Camoin Associates, out of Saratoga Springs, New York, to really look at what the economic impact of our downtowns is. And we essentially looked at all of the vacant parcels that we have in our town centers, as well as those multi-story buildings where you'll have retail or commercial on the first floors, but the upper stories are sitting there unutilized and vacant at this point in some communities. If we were able to really bring those back online, the potential is 187 million square feet of additional development. That would potentially result in 20,000 new business opportunities and 88,000 housing units. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. That would be a couple decades in the making, but it's important for us as a statewide network to be able to communicate to our legislators and others what our downtowns really do that do have that potential to seize upon. The Progressive Urban Management Associates, they're out of Denver. They had a top 10 global trends affecting downtowns in 2017. And one of the items that they focused in on was sort of a move by millennials from these star cities, the New Yorks, the Bostons, the kind of the bigger cities. They're now, many of them are focusing on small and medium-sized cities because they're more affordable. And another issue, a lot of millennials really want to make a difference, and in some of the bigger communities, they get lost. Whereas if they're in a Danbury, if they're in a Bridgeport, if they're in a Norwalk, they can really sink their teeth into local projects and make something happen. So that's a trend that I think is going to continue. And I'll touch base a little bit more on millennials in a couple slides from now. What was that? It was called the Progressive Urban Management Associates, PUMA. Yes, I should point out that if all of that space were brought online, the new tax revenue that would be generated would amount to a billion dollars. And wouldn't that be quite helpful in our state budget crisis to have that additional revenue coming in? You know, despite Connecticut's budget challenges, who here in the room considers themselves a cheerleader for Connecticut? I'm glad almost I think every hand went up. We live in a phenomenal state. It is truly a blessing for us to be where we're at. You know, I think sometimes we get a little too focused on some of the negative. We're got 3 million people in the state. We're one of the most wealthy states in the country. So why is it that we continually harp on some of the negative news that occurs? There's so much more positive news to work with on a day-to-day basis. And I need each of you to be an extension of what we're doing and share those great stories. You know, the whole concept of GE moving out of Fairfield, some pinned it on the state tax issues. That might be the case, but I think the move was because of a suburban office park issue. They felt that they needed to be in a bigger city in order to attract that talent. But as I just said, just recently with that new move to the small and medium-sized cities, we're already finding out that GE's having issues in Boston. CVS or Aetna was going to go down to New York City, and that was pulled, and they're going to stay in Hartford. And that's a great move on the part of Aetna and CVS. The whole history of Aetna is right there in our capital city, the insurance capital of the world. The talent base is already there. The number of institutions of higher learning that we have here in Connecticut is really first class. The concentration, the number of students that we have, what we need to do a better job of is job creation and trying to keep those millennials and young students in the state. So, encouraging connectivity. I see our downtowns as a place where people connect at the human level. In our digital world, it's just so simple, isn't it? To just get buried in your handheld device or your laptop. People have a hard time nowadays to communicate with other people. These are great satirical prints. The first one is like Facebook. That your window to the world is Facebook, because you're not getting out onto the streets and meeting people. I think people can certainly understand what that middle one is. I have to constantly remind my 15-year-old and 12-year-old, please get off your phone and connect with the other people that are in the room. And I got to admit, I'm guilty of it as well sometimes. You've seen the thing where you take your cell phones and you put them on the middle of the table if you go out to the restaurant, and whoever pulls their phone first has to pay for the bill. I think that makes a lot of sense. The technology, the studies show that it's actually affecting our brains. It's changing our brains. Every single time we get a new email or whatever, we're getting a dopamine hit. And it really is quite an attraction for a lot of people. Young adults who spend more than 2 hours a day on social media, the studies are showing that they're feeling isolated and that they have depression. So we need to work on getting more people out of their homes, away from the screens, into our downtowns, to the shops, to the brew pubs, to the boutique locations, the galleries, the art galleries, to the town greens, to these signature events. One thing I tell people is if in your communities you're going to have a signature event that you think would have statewide attraction, please let the Connecticut Main Street Center know. So like the Milford Oyster Festival in Putnam in a couple of weeks, they're going to have the largest ice carving event in the United States. So that's something that you might want to look into. So if you have a signature event, please let us know. So what do millennials want? What have you heard about millennials? Anybody? Where do they want to live? What have you heard? What's that? Right. A lot of them, as I said earlier, they want to be in the big cities, but they are not a monolithic group. That's really important for people to know. They're not monolithic. They have each their own desires. So you hear that they want to rent, and they don't want to own. Have you heard that? That they want to rent, they want to, no. They actually have a higher desire than people of our generations to own a home. The challenge is they can't afford it. They're so burdened by the student loan debt, which averages $30,000 a student, that they can't save up for the down payment. They would totally purchase homes if they had the ability. But because of the student loan burdens, they're often staying with their folks or finding the apartment. They do want to be in authentic, walkable areas. So what does that tell us about the suburbs with the millennials? They don't necessarily want to live in the big city or in the Danbury or the Bridgeport. So you who are out there representing those suburbs, I'm trying to tell you, you're not screwed, okay? They actually will want to live out in the suburbs, but they're going to want to know that they can easily go down to their downtown area and grab a bite to eat and spend time with folks. And they also want to be within 20 minutes of the Bridgeport, of the Norwalk, of the Danbury. Okay? So that's something to think about. And Stanford, obviously, yes. I'm a little worried. If I throw out a name here and I don't give full credence to everybody, I might get... So what about empty nesters? About empty nesters, you've heard that they want to also potentially be in downtowns. The statistics really are they want to age in place. They want to stay in the communities in which they, which they raise their families. So they also do want to live where there is walkability. So once again, that's where the downtown comes into play. Now, those empty nesters who do want to move, they totally want to be in a hip location where there's lots of activity, where there's the arts and culture, and that they can enjoy that each day. The other thing for the empty nesters is they would want to own. So rental isn't as exciting to them. They would want to own the condos. So something to consider. Is there a retail apocalypse? Who here in the room thinks we're going through a retail apocalypse? Yeah. So the answer is no. We do not have a retail apocalypse happening. There are definitely adjustments being made to the market. The major retailers, many of them were totally overextended in debt, and that has caused some challenges. Obviously, the rise of online sales, the Amazons, et cetera, definitely is cutting into profits. But still, 90% of shopping occurs in a physical space. What the experts are saying, though, is that more and more the consumers, when they go to that physical space, they want something that's kind of cool. The way that the merchandise is laid out, the way that it's marketed on the windows in the front of the store, something that engages them. Folks still will go order online, but a lot of times they'll go to the physical brick and mortar store to feel and touch whatever it is that they're looking to shop for. U.S. retailers announced more than 3,000 store openings in the first 3 quarters of 2017. So there's a lot more business starts than there are business closings, but obviously the big Sears and others, when you hear that, it makes you have to wonder. What are some of the things that local communities can jump in on? Restaurants. A lot of communities are utilizing restaurants as a draw to their community. Those that do it well and have a critical mass of restaurants, that is a huge thing for those communities. Middletown was just recognized for like 40 different restaurants of all types right in their downtown Main Street area. So I highly encourage everybody around the room, do what you can to encourage restaurants, go patronize them, and help the restaurant business is tough. The owners live, work, eat, breathe their restaurants, so we need to support them. Some of the other things that we can capitalize on is the pop-ups. Some communities, when there's been a vacant space around the holidays, have a pop-up market. Try to get some arts and crafters in those spaces, add a little bit of life. Maker spaces is a big, big movement. The co-working spaces, artisan establishments. Those are all different things that we need to capitalize on. And also the shop local. American Express has a shop local Saturday. They've got welcome mats that say shop local. Do whatever you can to get that message out to shop local. On the right is a picture of downtown Danbury. These communities that do it well and have downtown marketing can really keep the retail going and the restaurants. So Connecticut Main Street Center, we don't discriminate. We'll work with village centers. We'll work with traditional town centers, as well as the urban downtown. So our membership ranges from the smallest of communities to the largest communities. The Main Street approach itself, this was developed by the National Main Street Center many years ago, 4 different primary objectives. The first one being organization. There's got to be some group that is focused on the downtown development. It's not going to just happen on its own. Or it may happen on its own, but it certainly won't be to the level that if you have someone who's doing the business visitations, who's doing the marketing, who's really focused in on what the empty spaces are and how to attract new folks to those spaces, who is the market to even promote to. So organization's really critical. It ranges between different communities. Sometimes it's the local economic developer who's really doing most of the focus of Main Street, along with maybe the town planner. Other communities have a designated nonprofit organization. Downtown Wallingford, for instance, has a full-time director and a board of directors, and they draw money from the community as well as member businesses and families in Wallingford, and they do a phenomenal job. First Down Downtown in my hometown of Windsor has a part-time administrator. Other communities have business improvement districts. We've got Mike Moore, who's the deputy director of Stamford's Downtown Special Services District. Bridgeport just hired a new executive director who will be introduced at a function in a couple of weeks for their Downtown Special Services District. Organization's really critical. Design. Who's really looking at how the buildings look, how the buildings are laid out compared to the streets and the sidewalks to encourage that pedestrian movement in the downtowns. Promotion. Promotion's absolutely critical. If you don't promote your downtown, nobody's going to know about its assets, nobody's going to know about the events. So have a committee that's really just focused in on getting the word out. With social media, you have so many new tools to work with. And then economic vitality. Even the strongest of communities and downtowns are going to have their challenging properties that will take a lot of time, effort, money to work with to get them back utilized and onto the tax rolls and generating activity. So it's critical that someone is focused on that as well. We've added to the National Main Street Center's approach, and we really look at 6 different areas. As you can see, on the very top is place, and that's what most of the folks in this room are interested in, that the arts, fun events, historic preservation. But there's some other areas, the economics. Downtowns have to be looking at the jobs, the housing, what are the rents, what are the market activities that are happening, to support local business. Stewardship, as I said, you have to have a managed downtown, but you also have to have downtown-friendly regulations. So a lot of communities are working on that to make sure that they don't have parking ratios that are just going to prevent some really walkable scale development happening. Inclusiveness, how do you create neighborhoods of choice? How do you prevent gentrification? What are things that you can do to have a more inclusive environment? Sustainability in our downtowns, we've got parks, there's brooks and rivers that travel through it. So having the trails, having stewardship of those environmental resources. Our buildings, we can look at making them more energy efficient so that the businesses and the people who are living in those communities will have a better opportunity to money. And then connectivity, the bikeability, transit, and all of that. This is a comprehensive approach. If you just try to focus on one of these areas without focusing on all simultaneously, your area is not going to benefit to the same level. Placekeeping. Actually, I was with Christina Newman-Scott, who I think was going down to Washington, D.C. for another activity and wasn't able to make it today. But I heard her use this phrase the other day, placekeeping. And it really did resonate with me. We want to certainly do the placemaking, but let's start off with the placekeeping. Traveling around the state of Connecticut, we have just unbelievably beautiful architecture. Our churches, our neighborhood schools, town halls, it's really phenomenal. A lot of the housing, the Main Street multi-story buildings, the architectural detail in some of these buildings that will never, I don't want to say never, I hope we have a sort of coming back to incorporating some of the detail architecture. I will say as I travel around the state, the new development that I see is pretty vanilla on the outside of those buildings. So whatever we can do as communities to really encourage the developers. I know budgets are always a big issue, and some of those details end up getting pulled off the agenda as you get closer to construction. But we got to remember that these buildings are going to be up there for the next 50, 60, 70 years, impacting our visual, view shed. So whatever communities can do to really address that would be great. And then there's historic landscapes. Seaside and Bridgeport, all of our parks are down, our town greens are really a place that communities can focus in on, and we really need to hype those up. Historic preservation in general, as I said earlier, the state historic tax credits have been a really important gap financing tool. They're oversubscribed in the state. $32 million is allocated. We're in January, and already this year's allocation is essentially fully utilized. So last year we went before the state legislature trying to increase that cap to $64 million. Because of the budget issues, people were concerned that's really a budget expenditure, but we need to do a better job of showing the legislators when those projects occur, how much was spent in historic tax credits, and what the leverage, what economic impacts really occurred. There's a new mill building in Windsor Locks that's utilizing state historic tax credits. It's a $64 million investment downtown. It's going to bring 160 folks, if not more, into the town center to go shopping, feed on the street. So increasing that historic tax credits is really critical. What is placemaking? It's really a collaborative effort. In a lot of communities over the years, I think that there's been a bit of a challenge. The developers come in, they meet up with local staff, and kind of everything is done just in a small circle. And then you might say even on a streetscape project, you do most of the design, and then you go out to the public and say, what do you think of the design that we came up with? The placemaking movement is really trying to bring more of your residents into the process earlier on. Connecticut and Fairfield County already have place. You already have place. So we got to, again, focus on that first, but then really bring all those assets together and market them in a way that's going to attract talent, and having organic ideas from your residents, I think, is really, really helpful. Love this slide. This is of McLeavey Green in Bridgeport that Mike worked really, really hard, got a couple of grants through the Connecticut Main Street Center and the Office of Culture and Tourism to do some placemaking. This quote is from Kip Bergstrom. Great art makes great places attract great talent create great jobs. Everybody in this room can totally agree to that sentiment. What are the benefits of great places? They catalyze private investment. Money, money, money. You know, as artists, you need to make a buck, right? Who here needs to make a buck? Okay? Again, utilizing the Cultural Alliance and your local communities and the marketing, we need to do what we can to create that environment that's really going to be beneficial to the arts and culture group. Obviously improving quality of life, and it builds local pride. You know, that poll that I said earlier, who's a champion for Connecticut, that's because you have pride of place. And the same holds true in each of the local communities, is to have pride of place and find ways to really enhance what you already have in your local community. Some of the principles of placemaking, and a lot of this is from the Project for Public Spaces. If you haven't been to their website, if you haven't been on some of their webinars, I highly, highly encourage it. They are just a phenomenal resource to look at and learn from. They are on social media. They got their Twitter handle and everything, so you can get daily inspiration from them. I'd also let people know that you would want to connect up with Smart Growth America. They have some wonderful things that are coming out of that organization as well. Smart Growth America, Project for Public Spaces. So some of their elements, as I said earlier, community's expert, so get your residents involved. You're creating a place, not a design. You know, just having pretty pictures isn't enough. Ultimately, the space has to be functional. You can't do it alone. You have to have stakeholders and collaborators in order to make something happen. You're always going to have the naysayers that it can't be done. You got to work through that. You're also going to have people who are in the know, the architects and engineers, who may even say it can't be done. So you need to keep fighting through that. In Windsor Locks, they relocated the train station out of the town center 40 years ago. We tried to get it moved back, and we were told, nope, it can't be done. So we hired a national consultant in traffic engineering, and they said, no, it can be done. And we were able to go back to DOT and others to make it work. In our town centers, DOT really factors in very heavily, because most of those main roads going through downtowns are state routes. So it's really important to have a good working relationship with them. And sometimes you have to push back, and sometimes you as communities have to stand your ground and say, this is what we really want, and work with your legislators to make it done. You can see a lot by just observing. You know, you got to go to the space and really absorb it and understand what's happening in the space to really make it work. I think your digital camera on your phone is a wonderful tool to go around and really capture the essence of any particular space. Triangulation, really that means having multiple reasons for someone to be at the location, okay? So if you have a bench, you also want the hot dog cart, and you want the stand-up performer. You know, triangulation, have multiple things happening in the same space. I'll get to lighter, quicker, and cheaper, but those are, oh, right there, look at that, lighter, quicker, cheaper. You don't have to spend a boatload of money. Not everything is a multi-million-dollar streetscape project. You can create street festivals with dancing right on the street. That one of these middle ones just has a cornhole you know, competition right on a local space, your farmers markets, all these type of things. Think about those that you can implement today, not wait multiple years of design, et cetera, to make something happen. Project for Public Spaces has a step-by-step guide. I have 5 steps that I'll go through. I love this picture of the stairs, and then you got the stairs that are in Bridgeport. Hopefully everybody has seen the stairs in Bridgeport that are painted. They're just absolutely phenomenal. Not this set, but there's another example of something similar to this that are tremendous. What are some of the steps is, you know, first define the space, identify who the stakeholders are. You want to get around the table, and it sounds like you're doing that with these working groups of the different communities. Get your arts and culture, get your local planner, economic developer. You want professionals as well as residents, so there's a good mix. You want to evaluate the space to identify the issues. They have something called the place game, where you would actually go and break up into small groups and run through a number of questions, say on a town green. You identify what you think would make this space work better and attract more people. People attract more people. That has to be sort of a mantra. And you would look to see what you think would draw more people, and then you come back together as a larger group and discuss it before you get into the design level. Obviously, we've all seen spaces like this on the left, and then on the right, just capturing people's imagination and making something happen is critical. Here's some examples right here in Norwalk. They've had a placemaking program. They said create anywhere, you know, in a parking lot. You can set up, you know, a place to have a pop-up gallery, places to sit, and information, critically important. New London's project storefronts, they were suffering with a lot of vacancies on the first floor retail, so they've got artists to go and really remake the front of many of these buildings, utilizing really creative creating the concept diagram. I think it's really important that you have these visuals to communicate with the residents. Sometimes we can't really fully understand what someone's trying to achieve, but you draw those pictures, you do the elevation, you do a design, and you utilize those in your marketing and promotion of the events, and then you have charrettes where you actually take that design, really examine them and determine, is it going to achieve what you want it to achieve in your community. Doing short-term experiments, you know, having stand-up chess. These yoga clinics are happening all over the state of Connecticut, where in parks or a street will be closed down at lunch, and everybody's out there with the yoga mats. Closing down a street and setting up tables and having your local restaurants serve folks right out on the street. These are all, what's that? That's Scrabble, yep. And then ongoing reevaluation and long-term improvement. So the long-term improvements, those are the expensive ones. Those are the streetscapes. Those are infrastructure type things. It's going to be a little bit more challenging in the next couple of years. A lot of our streetscape work that's been done has been funded through the Small Town Economic Assistance Program or the Main Street Investment Fund. I think with the state budget issues that will be a little bit curtailed. But we got to keep moving on that, looking for other opportunities to fund these items. For the local artists, I hope you're all tapping into the power of crowd funding, the Kickstarters, GoFundMes, all of those type of platforms. When you have an idea and you think that it's going to be $2,000 to $10,000 in that range, I think these Kickstarter type platforms are really tremendously effective. Lighter, quicker, cheaper. Again, it ranges from these one-day events on the left, less intense, recurring events, all the way to the more intense permanent infrastructure. The whole continuum. Denver's Union Station. It was a wasteland at one point, apparently, and they've really dressed it up, and they've had farmers markets, and beer tents and performing artists, and they turned this wasteland into a very attractive location for millennials. A professor in Denver said, bring people who aren't currently going to the space and ask them why they are not going there. They're going to be the ones who are going to be your best experts as to how you turn that place around and get people motivated to go there once again. This is an example of a mill area in Buffalo, New York, and just they call it with whimsical buildings. They've been able to create this relatively cheap way to attract people to this downtown area. Placemaking can happen in your small towns, so if you're in a community of 9,000 or even less, you can do this work as well on your town green or in other locations. Simsbury, Connecticut has a flower bridge that attracts a lot of people just to see these hanging flowers on this walking bridge. Collinsville in New Hartford's done a tremendous, or Canton, excuse me, has done a tremendous job with a massive farmers market, as well as in the town of Coventry. They have a massive farmers market going. Downtown New Britain's an example. They put up these historic signs that highlight the background of the community, the important people that have lived there and have impacted it. They have a new fast track station with benches, and they're trying to really incorporate that transit focus. Again, this is a bit of an eye chart, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that this tool is available, this one and the next slide. It is from Project for Public Spaces. There's really, in the inner circle, the key attributes: sociability, uses and activities, comfort and image, and access and linkages. It goes to the next circle, which are the intangibles. Is it fun? Is it active? Is it cooperative? Is it prideful, friendly? And then on the outer circle, it goes into measurements. How do we know that we're succeeding? What are the land use patterns? What are the crime statistics? So how much transit usage there may be? Any one of your communities can take that dial right there and really do an analysis as to whether or not your location rises to the level of a great place. This slide is all about the benefits of great places. We've touched on a lot of those themes already, so I won't go into this, but I think this slide would be really helpful for any of you when you're having a community forum to pass this out so that people can quickly and easily see what are the benefits of generating great places. How placemaking can support the innovation economy. It's critical that we have high-tech innovators in the state of Connecticut, and having these dynamic town centers, having these maker spaces, having these co-work spaces really is going to be critically important for the health of the state of Connecticut going forward. Our main streets are places for people. There's parades that are happening. There's many different functions, the stand-up chests going on, putting ranges, you name it. On the bottom right is essentially a parking space that a restaurant has utilized to expand during the course of the day to have some outdoor seating. So there's ways to do this cheaply. Investment in public parks. This is an example of Meriden Green, a 14-acre new facility in their town center right by their new train station. It serves also as a flood control. The challenge that they're going to have is on 14 acres, kind of like Central Park and elsewhere, is how do they now program that space so that it's not just an open field for many days a year. There's many different examples to look at across the country. Bryant Park in New York was, they called it Needle Park at one point because of the drug dealers and the homeless that were sleeping there every night, and now it's been converted into this unbelievable location where there's like 6 million visitors a year. And the organization that's responsible for Bryant Park, they try to do at least 15 new improvements to the park each year. So they are constantly looking at what works and what's not working. Centennial Park in Atlanta was an area which was really depressed, and they turned it into an area that really attracts lots of people thanks to the Olympics that were there in the mid-90s. Public art and placemaking, the slide on the left is in New London. That's a whale's tail. I mean, they were known to be a whaling community, and so that's just a phenomenal use of public art. The example on the right is a Calder sculpture known as the Eagle. I could have also taken the picture, and I did have pictures of the one that's right by the City Hall in the city of Hartford. What I liked about this one was that people were just kind of camped out in some chairs right underneath the sculpture. Mural projects. This one on the left is in the city of Torrington. That was just one giant blank wall, probably the size of like a Target. They're trying to really recapture their river there, and having that blank wall was not going to attract anybody. So they have this beautiful new mural with the river theme. On the right is Greetings from Waterbury. That's as you come off one of the exits, a big mural on the side of one of the buildings. A lot of communities can really utilize this to encourage really fun projects. My brother and I recently completed a 31-mile ultra in Philadelphia. It retraced all the steps of the Rocky movies. And there was hundreds and hundreds of murals. I highly encourage communities to do that. Here in Fairfield County, you have so many stops on the Metro North as well as the Danbury line. I encourage you really to look at those really carefully as to how you can do some places that people want to congregate right around those transit stations. So thank you very much for this opportunity. We're a resource to you. Please do not hesitate to reach out. We're a small 4.5 staff members. We're small and mighty, and we'll do what we can to answer your questions and point you in the right direction to get some of your projects completed. Ultimately, that's the purpose. We want far too many plans in different communities get done and then get placed on shelves. We have to find a way to take those plans that we've invested so much time and energy and move them to actual execution. So.